From the Ohio River Valley to daring Iroquois raids against the French in Ohio County and British and Bengali forces clashing in Calcutta, the 7 Years' War was a chaotic and bloody affair. One that played out not only across Europe, but multiple global theaters. A conflict of firsts, which in many ways ushered in a new age of warfare. It would reshape European power dynamics for decades and even make a contribution to the coming age of revolutions and social upheaval. Exploring the European context a little at the time of the outbreak of the 7 Years' War is helpful in understanding the conflict. Europe, by the mid-18th century, was a rapidly modernizing society. The Enlightenment and rationalism had both taken root, while increased power sharing between monarchs and parliament had begun in Britain. In continental Europe, advisors to the monarch also played an increasing role. This changed the fundamental dynamics of power, with other emerging centers of influence and statesmen of note outside the monarch alone. This included figures such as Prime Minister of England William Pitt the Elder and Foreign Minister of France Etienne Choiseul, both of whom would play a significant role in the coming events. There were also great changes taking place globally. This was the age of empire, and European colonial activity was stepping up a gear. Rampant expansion, exploration, and clashes with rivals over new lucrative outposts occurred. From the Caribbean to India and North America, European troops were now facing off in battles over beaver pelts, forts, sugar, and ports. Most often involving age-old rivals Britain and France, this provided the unique global dimension to the conflict, with foreign colonies recognized for their strategic value in the war and long-term value as part of a global empire. The more static economic order of medieval society had also given way to an emergent capitalism. This helped fuel economic growth, in turn building up a more robust tax base for leaders to draw upon for their armies. It also fueled advances across industries, including weapons technology. This helped give rise to a refined firearm, transforming it from something of a sideshow in the 1600s to an increasingly integral part of European standing armies. The musket, smoothbore field artillery, and new howitzers would all go on to play key roles in the coming conflict and all those following it. All in all, Europe in the mid-1700s was a transformed society and one rife with competition between great powers who now had ever more to fight over. This video is brought to you by War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and you can play it right now for free. Available on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and even on mobile, War Thunder lets you command over 2,500 vehicles across 10 nations. From 1920s biplanes and armored cars to cutting-edge fighter jets and main battle tanks, every vehicle is modeled with incredible detail. One of the features I love most is the advanced damage system. Shells behave just like their real-world counterparts, and the game's X-ray kill cam shows exactly how your play neutralized the enemy. You can jump into fast-paced arcade battles, dive into realistic mode for balance, or take on the ultimate challenge in Simulator. Plus, the mobile version means you can take the fight anywhere. Use my link in the description and new or returning players on PC and consoles will also grab a massive bonus pack including multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive Eagle of Valor decorator, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium. This offer is free, but only available for a limited time, so do not miss it. Power players and competing interests. The immediate interests of the European parties are complex, but can be boiled down into some key factors in the years leading up to the war. The British outlook was greatly informed by the electorate of Hanover. This was a region in northern Germany whose title was held by King George II, alongside the British crown. Born and raised in Hanover, he was determined to hold it against any French challenge. This interest sat alongside the constant British desire to gain general dominance over the French, especially in the colonial areas where they faced off. For its part, Austria's long-standing enmity was with Prussia. A key point of friction was Prussia's seizure of Austrian Silesia during the War of Succession in the 1740s. Felt by Austria to be a violation at a point of weakness, it was keen to see it restored as a territory, with it becoming somewhat of a key state aim. Prussia itself was territorially far smaller, but it had an efficient military numbering up to around 130,000 by the mid-1700s. Relative to the population size, this was a large force, which was more than capable of projecting power in Europe. With a high degree of discipline to match, it helped make Prussia a key player in Europe at this time. France, in the meantime, was in a troubled economic position. This was due in part to an inefficient tax system, the effects of poor harvests, and state corruption. Its strategy had long centered on maintaining a significant land force. This likely stood around 250,000 men by 1750, down from a height of 400,000 during the Austrian War of Succession. It was intended to both defend its borders as well as project power within Europe. This, however, came at the expense of its navy, which left it vulnerable at sea and on its colonial holdings, which by this time were expansive. So, like Britain, France took a more global view of the conflict, despite its prime concern remaining securing interests on its doorstep. It was this melting pot of regional ambitions, colonial rivalries, and national grudges that would prime the great powers for war. Multiple European powers had significant empires across the globe by this point. It would be bitter rivals Britain and France, though, that helped set off the 7 Years' War with their colonial conflicts. North America had become a particular focal point over recent decades, with both nations' attention drawn to Ohio country in particular. The French had been pushing south from their Canadian holdings, while the British probing west from their colonies along the eastern seaboard. Here, the rich trapping grounds, extensive river systems, and potential control over routes west proved irresistible prizes. Fighting had broken out in 1754 in the upper Ohio River Valley, in what would become known as the French and Indian War. It heavily involved native allies fighting on each side, all pursuing their own tribal agendas. The Shawnee, Lenape, and Iroquois proved particularly prominent combatants in this fascinating theater of the conflict. But North America wasn't the only flashpoint. Other areas included the Caribbean and India. The Caribbean Sugar Islands were among the most lucrative and contested regions. India, meanwhile, was fast becoming a priority for Britain, with outposts established by the East India Company in areas including Calcutta and Bombay. The French, from their primary base in Pondicherry, attempted to leverage alliances with local forces to disrupt British activity, with activity focused particularly along the southeast coast. This had already erupted in two prior conflicts known as the First and Second Carnatic Wars. Along with the French and Indian War in North America, they provided the supplementary tinder for the war in Europe soon to unfold. Diplomatic Revolution. The final move before the war came in the form of the Diplomatic Revolution of 1756. The power blocs had long been Britain and Austria, united against common enemy, France. This, however, was all about to be upended. Britain, primarily motivated by its concern over its Hanoverian holding, sought a radical new alliance with old enemy Prussia. This was despite them having been on opposing sides as recently as the Austrian War of Austrian Succession in the 1740s. They hoped the dynamic and clearly capable Frederick could help ensure the safety of Hanover and act as a general counterweight to the French on the continent. With this new agreement formalized in the Westminster Convention of January 1756, Britain jettisoned traditional ally Austria. Thwarted Austria consequently turned to their previous enemy France, together forming an alliance of their own against the new Anglo-Prussian Axis. Now on one side, the British and Prussians alongside Hanover and other small allies facing off against the Bourbon Alliance of Austria, France, Saxony, Russia, Sweden, and from 1762, Spain as well. Russia and Sweden were already aligned against Prussia before this shift, but the Revolution of 1756 firmly consolidated the blocs. This marked a significant shift in time-tested alliances and illustrates the dynamism and fluidity of power in this period. Old commitments were shed to serve the interests of the present, causing great ruptures in the process. With this British about-face, the scene was now set for the start of the war in Europe, and with it, the beginning of a new global conflict, one potentially matched only by Napoleon's later wars and the two great wars of the 20th century for scale and active global theaters. Outbreak of War. The first move of the war was made by France. They began massing troops at Toulon from early in the year for an attack on the British island holding of Minorca in the Mediterranean. While in many ways an extension of their ongoing conflict in North America, it marked a step change by bringing the hot water to Europe. The main British fort on the island at Port Mahon was besieged from the 20th of May and fell on June 28, 1756. Despite the efforts of a British relief force, it was ultimately unsuccessful, and Minorca was seized by the French. This relief force was led by Admiral John Byng, a previously decorated and well-respected naval commander. He was nonetheless court-martialed and subsequently executed by firing squad on the deck of a ship for his role in the failure. Found guilty of not doing his utmost, the incendiary decision demonstrated the charged political atmosphere in Britain at the time. Now it would be Frederick who would make his move. This began in late August 1756 with a preemptive invasion of Saxony, the small state bordering Prussia to the south. As an ally of Austria, Frederick wanted to remove them from the conflict quickly, as well as use Saxon funds and forces to bolster his own war effort. Moving with around 60,000 well-prepared troops, this was a significant force, and one Austria was not expecting. The element of surprise allowed Frederick to initially occupy Dresden unopposed, while the Saxon army was besieged near Pirna. Leaving a force to attend to the siege, he then marched his 28,000-strong components south, with the aim of reaching the fertile Bohemian plains where they could overwinter. The plan, though, would not be a success, as the Austrian army lay in wait on his path. Battle of Lobositz. Austrian commander Maximilian Braun had gathered his forces at a defensive position near to the exit of a mountain pass Frederick needed to use to reach the Bohemian plains. Therefore, it would be Frederick, this time, who would be taken by surprise. Here at Lobositz on October 1st, 1756, the two European armies would clash for the first time. With the Austrians arriving in advance, they began to take up positions with the choice of terrain. They opted for the high ground on the slopes of the extinct volcano. The Elbe River sat to their left, while sloped vineyards covered the other flank, and access to the heights. In these vineyards were positioned Croatian battalions, supported by a further 8,000 troops nearby who could filter in reinforcements. Many of the other Austrian forces were also carefully positioned behind natural features, including a game reserve in marshland, and with infantry in one area told to lie down in an area of long grass. A heavy early morning mist also helped to further screen their positions. This meant Frederick emerged into the battlefield with very limited understanding of enemy troop numbers and positions, not an ideal situation when deciding strategy. His last experience against the Austrian army had also been during the Austrian War of Succession a decade previously. However, it had been reorganized in the intervening period, proving it a transformed fighting force and one his troops had not yet sized up. Initially thinking he was up against only a rearguard force of the main army, Frederick ordered a limited cavalry charge towards the Austrian troops he could see ahead. These Austrian bait troops pulled back, allowing the 1,200-strong Prussian cavalry to advance further into what was essentially a trap, stumbling first upon hundreds of Austrian grenadiers concealed in a sunken road, only for the Prussian cavalry to be opened up on by previously hidden artillery in a nearby village. While attempting to resist this onslaught, a further 1,300 fresh Austrian troops descended upon the flagging Prussians. Disciplined fire from deadly smoothbore muskets took its toll, and remnants of the Prussian cavalry were forced into a retreat back towards their own lines. Next, in a moment of poor Prussian command, one of Frederick's top generals, Gessler, ordered his entire cavalry force to advance without receiving the command to do so. Sitting behind the main infantry line, over 7,000 riders had to painstakingly pass through these troops before beginning their charge towards the Austrian positions. It must have been a startling sight for Frederick observing the battle, with him reportedly exclaiming, "My God! What is my cavalry doing?" The charge proceeded to get mauled in the same way as the first smaller thrust. Hidden Austrian artillery, infantry, and cavalry all lying in wait. The force was mostly wiped out, with the survivors retreating in disarray. At this point, Frederick temporarily withdrew from the battlefield before later returning. Many Prussian troops remained fighting though, with renewed attempts made on the vineyard area on the flank, which had been held so defiantly by the Croat troops. With all sides running low on ammunition and stamina, a general halt to the fighting soon occurred. This was not before Prussian howitzers opened fire on the nearby town, likely with incendiary shells. At least 100, mostly wounded troops who had been sheltering there, both Austrian and Prussian, were burned alive in the ensuing blaze, unable to escape in time. A savage end to a bloody day of fighting. Frederick, supposedly, had been assuming the resumption of fighting the next day. Austrian Commander Braun, however, ordered the withdrawal of his forces during the night. He felt the Prussian advance had been slowed and heavy damage inflicted. Consequently, it was claimed as a strategic victory for both sides, despite the results being somewhat inconclusive. The battle left an estimated 3,000 dead on each side. By no means catastrophic, but a significant loss nonetheless, at just under 10% of total troops involved. While not massively tilting the scales of the Austro-Prussian campaign, it did do a few important things. It put a temporary halt to the Prussian advance south into Bohemia, ending any hopes of a lightning advance by Frederick. It simultaneously checked his image of invincibility, which had grown strong in the prior period. Lastly, it gave each side their first taste of battle and the logistics of a new type of warfare. Military planners and strategists now better understood what it was like to advance against line-firing infantry equipped with state-of-the-art smoothbore muskets. Or the challenges of transporting all the necessary ammunition, not just for thousands of muskets, but also scores of artillery pieces to any given battle location. This was no longer medieval warfare, where an army could pretty much carry all they needed with them. Now it was increasingly about supply lines, crates of musket shots, cannonballs, howitzer shells, and gunpowder, all the while protecting against enemy ambush. Prussia's advance was halted for now. Abandoning plans to occupy the Bohemian plains, Frederick's army returned to Saxony for the winter. Despite the incoming lull, though, things would soon escalate dramatically, both in Europe and on global fronts. From the complex melting pot of rival European regional ambitions to military flare-ups in colonial theaters, the march to war had been gradual. Now, though, Europe was engulfed in a new conflict, and one which threatened to be more intense and economically destructive than those before it. Big thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget, you can play it for free right now on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile. Use my link in the description and new or returning players on PC and consoles will also grab a massive bonus pack with premium vehicles, silver lions, and more. It's free, but only for a limited time, so jump in today.